Good morning. Welcome from the World Economic Forum in Davos. We've got a star-studded panel here today to talk about mass events and massive gains. But first, I'm Srivastava, International Executive Editor at Business Insider and your moderator for today. Two quick housekeeping tips before we get straight in. One, if you're watching us live, join us on all the action. You can post, you can put a post on X with the hashtag WEF25. And we'll also take some questions from the audience in the end, so get your questions ready, and we'll open the floor towards the end. Right, let's get straight into it. Let me introduce my panelist. To my left is Patrice Louvet, CEO, Ralph Lauren Corporation. Next to Patrice is Her Highness Sheikha Latifa bin Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Chairperson, Dubai Culture and Arts Authority. Next to Her Highness is Anna Marks, Global Chair, Deloitte. And finally, we've got Sir Martin Sorrell, Executive Chairman, S4 Capital.
Morning.
Welcome to everyone.
Morning.
We are talking about the experience economy today. Now, the experience economy has emerged as one of the most powerful driver of economic growth and community transformation in the last couple of years. What do we mean by experience economy? We talk about Taylor Swift's Eras Tour, which generated about $5 billion in economic activity. We talk about Olympics, we talk about FIFA, and we'll be talking about a lot more today about this. But when we talk about the experience economy, it's not just from the point of view of economic growth, but it's from the point of view of uplifting individuals, bringing people together, collaboration, and a lot of those things. So I'm very interested to hear each one of your perspective. You all wear very unique hats, and so we'll get straight into it. But to start with, Anna, I want to start with you. Let's touch on the economic impact of this. How impactful are these events? What is the economic impact that you're seeing from you when you look at it from your role?
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you for inviting me here. I think it's a great topic to be discussing. I do have to declare a personal interest, though, because I am a big fan of live events and large events. That could be a concert, a music festival, live theatre, big sporting events, the Olympics, of course, and the Paralympics, which this year were just an incredible experience to be at. But it appears I am not the only one. Many others are enjoying and embracing the power of coming together and seeing a live event with your family, with your friends, connecting it in a different way and sharing those experiences. And when you think about actually how quickly this part of the sector is growing. I mean, at Paris actually, the Olympics and the Paralympics were world-breaking in terms of the number of ticket sales, over 12 million tickets sold across both the Paralympics and the Olympics. And you're absolutely right. I mean, the Taylor Swift Eras Tour, I'm told, I haven't verified these numbers, but I'm told that in my hometown of London, the contribution to the local economy was over $300 million. And when you look at some of the stats around where the live events industry could go, they're talking about by 2032, around a 6% CAGR growth to reach $1.2 trillion. I mean, that's huge. And the impact that has economically is really significant. But it's not just on the wider economic picture, it's actually locally to people in the local communities. And if you think about the influx of people into any one city for any event, what that does for local communities, local businesses, your local cafe, coffee shop, retail outlets, accommodation providers, it's really significant. But it isn't only the economic elements, it's also the legacy that they leave. We were the worldwide managing consulting partners to the IOC for the Olympics this year. And we could see firsthand how the IOC and the French Olympic Committee committed to building legacy. When you look at the stats, positively impacting 4.5 million children, largely, through grassroots sports programs. Upskilling 30,000 individuals with new skills and capabilities to enter the workplace in a different way post the Olympics. Spending 1.5 billion euros on accessibility into public spaces, which leaves a legacy of inclusion within the city. And doing all of that with half the carbon footprint from previous Olympics and Paralympics. So they clearly did an incredible job. But what does that mean for business? and we have to look at it through that lens also, these events are hugely complex to put on. And you think about all the sectors within industry that they touch, the creative industry, designers and so on, the infrastructure industry, you need stadiums, you need to fit out those stadiums. Even if it is an existing stadium, you need to adapt it. Taylor Swift might want something different from the next artist or event. You think about logistics, transport, technology, it covers touches every single sector. So a huge business opportunity as well for growth.
Those are striking numbers and very fascinating sort of bullets that you've mentioned there. I want to go to Martin, because we were just talking about this earlier before the panel. Even the Fed had to kind of come out and say that Taylor Swift has had a big impact on the US economy, right? You did not really...
Well, it was very interesting in the case of Asia. If you remember, Singapore got a lock.
Yeah.
And actually, probably Singapore was probably the only city in Asia from a traffic and congestion and air travel point of view that could have done it. So, but they got a lock, if you remember, and they had an exclusive. And that caused a little bit of disruption amongst other Asian countries. But, you know, I've been thinking about, as Anna was talking about, you know, what is driving all this? And it strikes me there are a couple of things that are pretty important driving. One is maybe social and a bit controversial. And the other is economic, in a world which is, if not deglobalizing, becoming less global. In the Ted Levitt 1983, you know, consumers are consuming everything in the same way everywhere, which Ralph Lauren benefit from at a premium level. So the first thing is social thing. I think there's an interesting dynamic accelerated by COVID, but was always there, and that is the digital revolution, you know, which is going to be exacerbated and accelerated by AI at a huge scale, which has created a big issue around loneliness. I mean, it's, I was at an event in Zurich on Sunday, and there's a woman there who runs a big commodities firm, Louis Dreyfus, and she has a foundation. She made a big part of her charitable effort to deal with this loneliness issue. And it sounds a little bit esoteric, and maybe a little bit, but it's really there, as you know from Business Insider, loneliness amongst young people. Mental health is a bit, so why is it that experiences are becoming important? So I would throw that one dynamic out as one thing. The second thing, which I think is really more important, is economic. In a world, for good or bad, that is fragmenting, that is faced with three massive geopolitical issues: US-China relations, or lack of them, Ukraine, Russia, President Putin's objectives, and last but not least, Iran and the Middle East and the tensions there. It means the world is much more fragmented, and nation branding, we're going to hear a little bit later, I think, something on that. Nation branding is critically important. I was on the board of F1 for 9 years, and Bernie Ecclestone would go to the leader of countries, this is absolutely true, unvarnished, and would say to the leader of a country, you know, you want to use Formula One to rebrand your country, or brand your country, it will cost you $200 million to build a track, not a street track, but a unique track, and you won't gain a penny. So any nation leader who wants to position their countries thinks of 3 or 4 major events. It used to be the Olympics, so I'll come back to the Olympics, because the Olympics has actually, I think, lost traction. Paris was really interesting because it repositioned the Olympics, but it's a quadrennial event. You do have the Winter Olympics, but the Winter Olympics are not as powerful as the Summer Olympics, and they did lose traction. Yep. They're losing traction with sponsors. And then you have, I think, second would be FIFA and the World Cup, and that has gained traction. You've got the Club World Cup now in the US in 2025. You'll have the World Cup in the US in 26. You'll have the Women's World Cup in Brazil in 27. And remember, the World Cup in the US will combine Canada, Mexico, and the US. It'll be very interesting to see how President Trump deals with that in that context. And then you've got the LA Olympics, which will have soccer or football as a major part of it. So that's the second one. And the third one is Formula One. And Formula One, when I was at Formula One was very much a European and Asian event, and has actually been the driver for F1 acceptance in the United States came from Netflix, if you remember that series.
Right.
The guy running sponsorship was really interesting. The guy running sponsorship came in for very heavy criticism for being unable to develop Formula One sponsorship in the US. And what triggered the interest was when he engaged Netflix on a series, and that developed the fan base. And now we have, I think it's three Grand Prix in the US. So those events go. But just one final point on it. So if anybody's trying to reposition their countries, and we're going to hear a little bit about the Middle East, what's really interesting about what's happening in the Middle East is we're seeing nation branding on a scale that we've never seen before. Because what's happening in the Middle East is the rulers of the countries in the Middle East are really thinking about not just the sports positioning. It goes much, much deeper. It's about political, cultural, social positioning of the country. The sort of things that we'll hear.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I think it's a good opportunity to go to Her Highness now. Yeah. Dubai has really positioned itself as a global cultural hub. When you look at, what's been happening with UAE in terms of leveraging arts and culture to bring communities together to drive economic growth, how do you see it? Could you tell us more about what's been happening?
I mean, thank you very much for introducing this part of this segment of the conversation. I just want to say I'm very proud to be sitting at a panel with giants of industry, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Before I speak about how we do what we do, I want to say a little bit about why we do it. And there is one overarching goal within the government of the UAE, and specifically the government of Dubai, that feeds every strategy we work on and every initiative and every plan. And that is the happiness and the well-being of the people of Dubai and creating a better quality of life for people. Now, when we do what we do, or when we set out to formulate our strategies or our plans, we have two options. The first is to look at what everyone else has done, benchmark against best practices, and achieve what everyone else has achieved already. The second, which is what we opted to do, is to really look at the industry and look at what our people need. And for me specifically, what the creative industry needs. And fill in the gaps as much as possible and create the opportunities and the platforms for the industry to thrive organically. So when you're speaking about culture, culture is a very important part of social fabric. It is the thread that connects communities. It is the thing that formulates your self-identity, creates your values, and it's the thing that really connects people and brings people together. And within the UAE, and specifically Dubai, you have a very interesting social fabric of people from over 180 nations that are living and working in Dubai. And they're living very cohesively within the society. And it's a different model than anywhere else in the world, because they don't have to integrate within the culture of the UAE to coexist with the people, but are respected for retaining their own cultural identity, their own cultural practice, and celebrated for it. We have a lot of different cultural celebrations that we share with them in Dubai from all over the world. We celebrate Diwali, we celebrate Christmas, we celebrate our national events and cultural celebrations as well. And I think this really contributes to the identity of how Dubai operates and presents a very unique way of doing things. And I'm happy to elaborate more on that.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll come to you, and we would love to hear some more examples, some stories, because I'm sure you've got lots to share. We have a chatty panel, so we'll kind of keep going. Patrice, I think this is a great opportunity to come to you now. From a retail perspective, from a branding perspective, how does Ralph Lauren align with big events? I mean, you've just had Paris Olympics. Walk us through, give us examples, talk to us about how that's been for you. What do you do as the CEO of Ralph Lauren? What's your role like in this?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me today. Exciting to be here with my co-panelist. These events play a really important role in our ability to engage consumers around the world. So Ralph has been in the sporting world for almost 20 years now. Olympics, US Open, Australian Open that's going on now, Wimbledon, Ryder Cup, PGA, and the list goes on. What really is important for us as we approach these events, one, we can engage with vast generations of consumers, right? In a way that's authentic, in a way that's impactful. And you look at the scale of these events. To Martin's point, a number of them are seeing growing audiences as years go by. So it's an opportunity to connect with a broad range of consumers, from kids to the silent generation. The second point is we're about storytelling, right? Often people think, well, Ralph Lauren is a fashion company. Actually, if Ralph were here, we'd say we're not in fashion at all. That's not what we do. What we do is we inspire people to dream, and a big part of that is storytelling. And the sports platform, I think, best fits with Ralph Lauren, actually, although your point,
You didn't
Martin.
mention polo, by the way.
Yeah, oddly enough, we don't do much in polo. But opportunity, you're absolutely right. If you look at the Olympics and these young athletes, I was talking to this young gymnast this summer in Paris, and I asked, she was out getting her Ralph Lauren outfit, and I asked her, when did you start aspiring to be an Olympian? And she said, when I was 4. Wow. Right, and talk about inspiring the dream of a better life. It's a perfect fit with what we stand for. So this is also the lens that we approach these events with, which is not just slap a logo and be part of 100 sponsors, but really use this as a platform to tell authentic stories that inspire our consumers and people around the world. And then the last thing I would say is we view this through the lens of partnership, not sponsorships, right? So when we work with Wimbledon, and we've been working with Wimbledon for 15 years, we work with them on their retail proposition, not just our store, but how they approach retail. We work with them on how they handle hospitality. So there's really a win-win in the way we construct these events. You're seeing a lot of brands in our space starting to lean into sports because I think they see the benefits that the teams have seen at Ralph Lauren over time. And we're going to continue to expand there. The Australian Open going on right now. Very exciting to see. I know we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but how it's not just about what happens in Melbourne or what happens in Australia. These are global platforms now that have incredible reach.
There's another social phenomenon there, just to lead into it, which is about shorter working week, AI implications of that, employment, retirement,
Right.
and leisure, and a belief that more have leisure time. There's one other thing I want to say in relation. There's a very subtle balance between commercialization. You mentioned Wimbledon. Your sponsorship of Wimbledon, not the retail store in the park, but on the court. If you remember, Rolex is on there.
Right.
It's very subtly. IBM is on there very subtly because they don't have any branding on center court or the courts. And you dress the umpires, the ball boys, the ball girls, etc. So that. The other flip side of that is what happened in the Olympics in Paris. If you remember, LVMH did an absolutely brilliant film, which I think was a 3-minute introductory film, which basically showed their craftsmen and craftswomen working on premium product. It caused a furore in the Olympic movement because it's the very first time ever that there has been open sponsorship in the context of the Olympics. Because as you know, one of the fundamental principles is that, and you dress the US team.
That's right.
Yeah. So it's really, in some of these sports and some of these activities, the balance is a very subtle one.
Yes.
And it was very interesting in Paris. It's certainly amongst the purists in the IOC movement overstepped the mark.
Which is very interesting.
And the consumer sees through that. I think
Yes.
that's where you have to
I think
be
it's
cautious.
for consumers to see that there is a trend. So there's a lot of hope in the way we've started our chat. It's interesting. It's very interesting to talk. I think one theme that's emerging is collaboration and partnership. These big events need a lot of stakeholders to come together, whether it's the governments or it's the businesses, local communities. How do you bring everyone together? What are the challenges that you're seeing? And I want to throw this question to the panel, so whoever wants to start first. But one of the challenges is bringing all of the stakeholders together. I see Anna, you want to?
Yeah, maybe if I can comment on that, and it picks up up on your partnership point. But just before I do that, Martin, you raised this point around loneliness and what AI does for loneliness. When you look at some of the research out there around what millennials and Gen Zs want, when they want to spend their money, they make choices, and they actually are telling us they want to spend their money on experiences and not product. And that's a really interesting trend, and I think it's aligned with what you were saying. But I love the way you describe the partnership with the sporting events as opposed to sponsorship, because when you just going back to any mass event, whether it's the Olympics or a sporting event or the Rugby World Cup, whatever it is, and you think about the complexity of laying it on, you need everybody to align. So, and when I say everybody, I mean governments, local authorities, business communities, and the local civil community as well. Because if they don't align, A, the event experience won't be the best it can be for the consumer, and B, you won't create the legacy that you want to create. And actually, for any brand, if you like, that's associated with that event, that's really important too, because we all have values that we want to live by. So if we just take one example, if you take transport, the government's contribution to the whole solution building for transport in a large event needs to be quite prevalent. They need to model and plan the transport routes, the efficiency, the ticketing profiles, all of those elements. And it changes depending on whether transport is government or privately owned, but that's broadly one element that they would contribute to. But then business needs to come on. They often own the infrastructure and the transport stock. They'll have the digital and technology capability to help with the modeling and the algorithms and the scenario planning. They'll be able to build a digital ticketing platforms. All those things, you need businesses to contribute their skills, as well as advising on sustainability for the transportation systems. But then you've got the local communities. The transports that's laid on for these mass events needs to work in tandem with local community life. So they need to be involved. They also need to be involved because they'll be able to articulate what their legacy should be and be part of that. The only way you can get all those parties together to get to the right solution if they are together right from the start, co-creating the solutions across all of that work stream. And transport's just one element of a big mass event. And that means not just building things individually. Government policymakers, local authorities will do this, business will do that, communities will do this. You need to really come together and not just sort of cooperate by not getting in each other's way, but deeply collaborate, agreeing what the vision is, building the solution together and delivering that. And you move that into partnership if you can underpin that with absolute trust. And it's critical for these big events.
I think I want to talk to Her Highness here, because we talked, when we were chatting earlier, you had some great examples from Dubai where collaboration has succeeded. And so if you could walk us through some examples, share some real-life examples, that would be amazing.
So I have two very important examples that we've worked on. One is the public-private partnership and collaboration between the public sector and the private sector. In every meeting I've been in with His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, Vice President and Prime Minister of the UAE and ruler of Dubai, he has emphasized the importance of working with the private sector. And from my experience and the experience of Dubai, the government is now in a position where it is moving just as fast, if not faster, than the private sector. And couple that with all the investments that the government has put into infrastructure, into different industries, you know, the digital industry, into AI, into new technology, we have gained the trust of the private sector. And from my experience within the cultural and creative industries, most, if not all of our initiatives are actually executed by the private sector. And that is hugely due to the trust that they have in the government. The second example that we've seen in Dubai recently is the Dubai Expo 2020, which actually happened during COVID. And for a nation to pull that off, it takes huge collaboration. It takes a lot of risk and a lot of trust as well in the government and the country. It took collaboration on a national level and an international level. And what we've taken out of Expo is a few key learnings. One is obviously collaboration. The second is inclusivity. And I think this was from what I've learned, the first Expo ever that has given a platform to every single country participating to have their own pavilion. And there were instances where there were countries who couldn't afford to build their own pavilion. And what happened was the Dubai Expo team designed and executed their pavilion for them. So every single country had an equal standing to present the best the country had to give to the world. And there's a reason that His Highness chose to bid for an Expo specifically, not a sporting event or any other mass event. And that's because Expos are platforms that bring people together, that work on collaborations for the betterment of humanity. And it's a very noble cause. And it has been delivered for the first time in the region, which is a pride not only for our nation, but for the Arab region as well and the Middle East. And I think we managed to deliver an exceptional Expo because of that.
Those are very good examples. I think, Martin, you want to jump in.
Just like there's a commercial tension that you have to think about, there's also, I think, an economic tension, because whilst it's true that these events are very powerful, they're also very costly.
Yes.
And they are funded by governments, either at a national level or at a local level, a regional level, or a city level. And actually, if you poll populations, in many cases, the local population will say the last thing we want is an Olympics. I mean, the Olympics is probably the toughest example, because you referred to legacy. Legacy and sustainability are difficult issues to do. If you're building football stadia, and Olympic stadia, what are they going to be used for in the future? And there's another thing, we'll be having the Club World Championship in the US, mainly East Coast this year. I think one game in Seattle and one game in LA, but I think it's 16 locations. You can imagine the private plane traffic that will be generated. You mentioned sustainability in relation to Paris and whatever. These are big issues. And the other thing is, it comes back to the loneliness thing as well, and the digital economy. Young people don't watch a football game for 45 minutes each half and 90 minutes. You may have seen Gerard Piqué has launched his King's Cup and Queen's Cup, which is a Saturday or Sunday in the Barcelona Stadium, and 6 games, 20 minutes each half, 20 minutes break, so 6 one-hour games, families go, thing. Different setup. Live Golf, we're involved with PIF and Live Golf, a shortened game, 52 holes, etc. So what's happening is the events are going to have to be changed, in my view, in the longer term in 2 ways. One, they're going to probably have to be less new facilities and therefore more economic. And they're also going to have to be much more sustainable. And they're also going to have to appeal to consumers, particularly Gen Z, who are different. Those of us who try to manage companies know managing Gen Z people is there was a session this morning with McKinsey, Leadership in the 21st Century. That question was not asked. I thought it was really interesting. I think managing Gen Z is totally different to managing my generation or other generations. So, and getting them to watch things is totally different, because they watch highlights. They're not prepared, they're multitasking even when they're watching highlights. So there's a lot of tensions here. It's commercial, it's government, it's social, it's sustainable, and it's around the digital economy as well.
That's very interesting. Patrice, did you want to comment on that? I wonder how some of these events can, help local communities. How can we build more sustainability when we're thinking about big experience events?
Yeah, I think Martin's point on infrastructure, and I always worry about these beautiful stadiums being built for World Cups or special events, and then what? Right? And some of them are in locations that are not necessarily that accessible. There's a counterexample back in the US where people build these infrastructures with retail around it that's alive and kicking 365 days a week. And I think you make better use of the asset that way, but I don't think we're doing that we're doing that consistently. Certainly, sustainability is top of mind for the younger generation, and it matters, and we need to do it in an authentic way. So that is part of the agenda as we talk to partners for these events, is okay, what's the sustainability angle to our engagements? It ranges from, we have polo shirts that are made from the cans of the tennis balls that are used at the tournaments right now. That's small scale, but it gives you an indication of the type of innovation that I think all the partners are looking to push, make sure sustainability is an area that we're moving forward in this context.
Yeah.
Can I jump on something that Martin mentioned earlier around belonging and this loneliness factor? Because the reason I think you're seeing success of all these platforms is indeed this deep loneliness that particularly the younger generation is feeling, and this sense of belonging, right? And when you're in that stadium, I got a chance to go see an Arsenal game during Christmas recently. And listen, I'm sure if you polled the population in that stadium, it's quite diverse, but yet there's this sense of belonging, of common passion that just is what people need in today's world, right? And they need hope and optimism and that sense of energy. And that's why I think you're seeing these programs be so successful.
Well, just to the point, it's a really interesting point. So in the Club World Championship, we have two Buenos Aires clubs, Boca Juniors and River Plate. And we haven't started, we're involved in it, we haven't started to sell tickets yet, formally. We've already had, I think it's 500,000 tickets sold to Argentinian supporters of Boca Juniors and River Plate. I mean, there's 2 out of 32 clubs that are competing. It's unbelievable. The passion and the connection.
Are we reaching a point where there is some sort of a fatigue setting in about these big experience events?
No, in relation to football,
no fatigue.
and soccer,
well, if we keep football aside, what if we keep football aside?
There is no fatigue, believe me.
Right.
This is absolutely huge. I mean, this is very relevant.
Right.
4 years of soccer in America. It's not the national sport. It's going to be very interesting at the end of 4 years when we get to LA 28, what position soccer, as the Americans call it, or football as we call it, will have relative to the NFL.
Especially with the World Cup in 26.
Absolutely.
Anna?
I'm not sure that there's fatigue, but we heard about the diverse community that live, particularly, say, in Dubai, for example. It is about absolutely understanding the consumer voice. You'll know more about this than I would in my day job. But when we work with organisations around how do you go about getting the pulse of the consumer? What do young generation want? But let's not forget, whilst we know that is one of the drivers, you're absolutely right, I agree with you, Martin, it's not the only driver. You know, us old folk, we also like to go and experience a music concert or a festival or go to an expo and learn. And these things, they're not, I don't think that they are going to expire. I think that they will evolve. I also think, to your point around tensions, I don't know if I would use the word tension. Maybe it's a healthy tension I would use, maybe. Because I think that when you're looking at the legacy for any event, expo or sporting event, whatever it is, this is my point around all actors in the ecosystem starting together. And you described it really beautifully around how do you get private and public sector, civil society coming together and saying, how are we going to deal with this event for the benefit of all, so we don't get a white elephant at the end in terms of the stadium because we'll repurpose it around retail or whatever the case may be. So I think we should be excited about this sector personally.
That's great. Let's open it up to questions now. Do we have any questions from the audience? If you do, please introduce yourself and tell us who your question is for. Yeah, go for it. Lady over there.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this great panel. Mina Al-Arabi from The National. I wanted to ask about the issue of security and safety at mass events. One of the things, I live in the UAE, and one of the things we love is that when we go to mass events, you actually feel quite safe. From small things like petty crime to, of course, bigger, God forbid, challenges. So how much safety comes into thinking, but also what lessons were learned from COVID in terms of also health and safety?
Who wants to go?
Well, we had an example in the UK, you know, the European final, which I went to. I remember it was on a Wimbledon Sunday. We travelled from the Wimbledon final to Wembley, and you remember there were the riots. In fact, there's a Netflix documentary on it, which I think you can probably stream. It's still on the platform, and it's a fundamental issue. And it's a really interesting question in the sense that there was no retribution in that particular case. You know, the police were out in force, but you know, people broke through barriers who didn't have tickets. I remember the manager of the Italian team, his son, was sitting in the section where we were. I was with TikTok, who were the sponsor who I was going with, and the manager's son couldn't sit in the seat that he'd been assigned, which was in a premium section. Somebody who didn't have a ticket occupied the seat. So it is a huge issue, and it's linked to this whole issue about communities. Do they really like these events? And when they have, you know, riots, when they have unruly behavior of the sort that you're talking about. I mean, when I arrived at the stadium, I think the kickoff was 8 p.m. in the evening. I arrived at about 6. I mean, the beer bottles and drinking and the pubs, they'd opened the pubs from earlier that day. It was on a Sunday. And so clearly the licensing laws had been altered in order to accommodate the fans, which turned out to be the wrong thing to do. So it is, you're right, it's a huge, and it really is a problem. It's one of the reasons why people vote against it when asked.
Anna, what do you think?
I think it's a brilliant question. And let's not forget, we're here at the World Economic Forum's annual meeting. This in itself is a large event. And do we feel safe sitting in this room? I feel safe.
We're in Switzerland. We're in Switzerland, for goodness sake.
Regardless of everything that's going on in the world outside, in this area, in this environment, we feel safe. And that's partly because we've created that environment between us. We are all here to talk, to collaborate, share ideas, and build that more sustainable and equitable future for all. But also we have big security. Yeah. Is it a pain when you're standing in the queue? Sometimes. But do we like it at the end because we feel safe? Absolutely. What I would say, and again, it goes back to some of the work that we do with organizations, whether it's for events or just organizational aspects, is crisis management. How do you role play? What could go wrong at this event we're about to hold? What would our response be, and how can we prevent it going wrong? So there's an element of deep risk assessment, thinking strategically, articulating those, working through those scenarios. That in itself is a whole big work stream. Yeah. So it's, and I guarantee, well, I can't guarantee, but I expect that at any major event, those conversations are happening. If they're not, they should be, well in advance of any event.
Her Highness, to her question, sorry, I'll just come back to you, that she feels safe in UAE. Could you tell us how you plan these events?
Hello, Mina, first of all. Great question. And just speaking from example, in Dubai, within our events, going back to Expo again, we have many heads of state visiting. There's rigorous security, but also at the same time, there has to be a balance between heavy security and people feeling free and safe to roam around and to experience this mass event. Again, I think it all comes down to rigorous planning. It comes down to collaborations, locally and internationally, with security from the UAE, international security, and we've seen it happen on the ground with so many delegations coming in, many on a single day as well, and it comes to a lot of foresight, a lot of crisis management, planning, role playing as well. So it does come down to a lot of planning beforehand.
Yeah. So planning and collaboration. Yes, there you go.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Veronica Ruiz-Elviso. I live in Miami, like Messi. But I'm originally from Venezuela, and I work a lot with brands because I have the owner of a holding company that makes a lot of experience for brands. And my question will be about what is your point of view about phygital? This mix around the real experience and integrate the digital and the streaming experience. For example, Gerard Piqué with the Kings League has created a huge community. Then finally, in big stadiums, that community attend to those events. But also with Taylor Swift concerts, in some point, she tried to include those persons that didn't have the capacity to have access to tickets, and led in some cities to have a digital experience in some points. So I think phygital, it talks about two things. The possibility of be bigger than the venue, and also to be more inclusive. Because if you make an intention to integrate maybe cities or the type of people who don't have the privilege to have access to those tickets, you can integrate them too. So I would love to hear.
That's a great question. Digital economy versus experience economy.
So I think it's really interesting. So as we were talking, it's interesting you raised the question. So Gerard Piqué also has the Queens League. I think he's launched it in Mexico. But so I was thinking as we were talking, AI is going to, we do a lot of personalization at scale, what we call hyper-personalization at scale. So when we do a Netflix campaign or Amazon Prime or Disney Plus or Univision, for a series like Narcos or whatever, we might develop 1.5 million, in theory, different assets. So depending on what your media habits are, what the data is saying about your media habits, and what the first-party data is saying, will serve you with an asset. So it's a highly personalized experience, but it is digital and it is online. When you think about that from the same point of view of the loneliness thing, it drives you to want to have a physical experience as a complement. And I think the bell rings on that you have this increasing pressure to personalize experience digitally in a virtual world, with the metaverse and everything else, and Ray-Ban and Oculus and whatever. And at the same time, so the thirst for the physical experience is exacerbated, is stimulated by that, and there's a balance there. And I think that there's another company that I come across called Bresh. Bresh is originally started in Argentina, interestingly, and it started off with raves, pop raves, music raves, for probably about 50 or 100 people. It's now gone global. And what they do is events, mainly pop music events. They have their own artists, and they pull in, not Taylor Swift, but artists of renown to their events too. And now they're doing events for like 15 or 20,000 people. And we're looking at how we can use, it's a good example at Formula One. Singapore was the first race. You used to have a Sting concert on a Thursday evening, Friday evening before the race on the weekend, and on the Monday after the weekend. So you start to see these live events being built. But Bresh is a really interesting company. You should take a look at it.
Martin, I'll have to stop you because we have only 2 minutes. But Anna, you wanted to say something, and then I want to come to you, Patrice.
Just in terms of, and I'll be really brief because I can see the clock winding down, all these events want to have a positive impact, a positive social impact. And I think you mentioned this when you were asking the question, inclusivity is really important, and financial exclusivity is perhaps a risk of a feature of some of these events because of the price point. But if I just let's take celebrations at New Year, right? Lots of events all over the world, and I'm at a party with my husband and my younger daughter, and we are watching with a whole load of friends. We're watching the television at midnight, watching the concert and the fireworks, and we're celebrating together, that piece around loneliness. So that's how some of these big events, by using whether it's social media, digital media, or streaming, to build that sense of community.
How do you tap into a digital economy and an experience economy?
I love your question. It's a core part of our strategy to scale our impact, right? So I'll give you 2 examples. We did a documentary with HBO on Ralph's history, called Very Ralph. We just launched it in China, in Shanghai, about 6 weeks ago. Very few people saw it live, right? But we streamed it. and we had 35 million people watch it at the same time as the hundreds of people watching it in the room. So that's one example. Similar for our fashion shows where people are ready to kill to be in the room, but actually tens of millions watch it when we stream it. And then going back to tennis, we show the tennis games in our stores. So in London, if you can't get into Wimbledon, because you can't get tickets through Martin, you can actually watch our windows. The windows of our One New Bond Street store is actually TV screens where actually people are watching the game. So we make it accessible and available to
Any
the broader
final
range.
thoughts, Her Highness, before we...
I mean, I think you answered your own question, you know, very eloquently. But as we've seen from COVID and the effects of COVID, it's become imperative to include digital strategies with, you know, physical events. And again, like you mentioned, to gain accessibility, inclusivity, that's the main driver from, you know, our work.
That's great. Thank you so much to our lovely panelists. Thank you for the questions, and thank you to everyone who's been watching us live. We hope you have a great Davos. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.